I've never been the type to get scared easily, but something in that house wasn't right from day one. I had rented that place for a month, just to be able to solve some family issues in another city. The house seemed perfect, isolated, quiet, and ideal to have a little peace while taking care of things. At first, everything was normal, but something bothered me. It was as if someone was watching me, but I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the tension of the moment and the fact that I was in a new place. I even allowed myself to relax after a few days, but this feeling of being watched didn't let me. The thing got worse little by little. On the second day, I noticed that the chair in the living room was slightly out of place, but I thought it could have been the wind or some involuntary movement. However, as the days went by, I began to notice more strange things. My cell phone appeared in different places, as if it had been moved. I left him at the coffee table, and when he returned from some task, he was in the kitchen, as if someone had moved him. And it wouldn't stop there. The doors, always closed when I left, appeared ajar when I came back, and that didn't seem right. I was already getting nervous, but I was still trying to rationalize, telling myself that it was just my imagination. It was on the night of the fourth day that things started to really scare me. I was in the living room, trying to watch a movie to relax, when I heard a noise coming from the corridor. Something like a scratch, very subtle, but noticeable. My heart raced, and I stood still, listening carefully. Nothing happened after that, but the weather in the house seemed heavier, as if the air was denser. I decided that, the next day, I would review the history of the smart doorbell. I thought maybe it had a logical explanation, something I hadn't noticed. I had no idea what I was about to find out. The history was there, with images and videos from previous nights. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, in one of the videos, I saw something that made me stop breathing. It was a man standing outside, staring at the door. He was there every night, always at the same time. He didn't move, he didn't do anything, he just stood there with his eyes fixed on the door, as if he was expecting something. I didn't know what to think. My body froze. There was no way I could have seen that without understanding how wrong it was. How was he there, every night, and I never heard him? The dread began to grow in me, but I couldn't understand. I didn't know what to do. That night, after watching the video, I couldn't sleep anymore. The idea that someone was watching me every day made me completely uncomfortable. I decided to stay awake and keep an eye on the door, the window, on anything that gave me some answer. I looked at my cell phone, checked the doorbell all the time, but nothing strange happened. At least, nothing visible. The noise of scratching the corridor came back, but now it seemed closer, almost inside the house. My stomach turned nervous. I went to the door to check, but everything was quiet, as if nothing had happened. I went back to the couch, and there I stayed, not knowing if I wanted to see what was happening or not. I was terrified. During the day, the feeling of being watched was stronger, and I could barely concentrate on my tasks. So, I decided to take action. I went to the window to see if I could find any clue where the man could be. The street light illuminated the garden, and everything seemed in order, but something in my mind told me that I was not safe there. I needed to get out of there, but a part of me still wanted to understand what was happening. I went back inside and, not knowing what else to do, I looked for an emergency number on the internet, something that would help me deal with the situation. When I turned to close the window, I saw his shadow at the front door. That shadow was what made me totally lose my composure. I froze, feeling an icy panic spreading through my body. He was there, standing still on the other side of the door. I couldn't believe that, after everything I had already lived there, that was happening again. He was watching me in such a calm way that it seemed almost like a silent threat, as if he was waiting for the right time to do something. Every fiber of my body screamed for me to run away, but I didn't know where to go. The only thing I could do was run to the phone and call the police. I tried to stay calm, explain the situation, but my voice trembled with so much fear. They said they would be there as soon as possible, but they advised me to lock all the doors and stay where I was. I did it, but the feeling that I was being watched was never so strong. Silence took over the house, and every sound seemed amplified. I couldn't help but look out the window, and every second the anguish increased. Did he know I had seen him? Was he already inside the house, and I didn't notice? The minutes seemed like hours, and it didn't take long for me to hear the police siren approaching. When the police arrived, I almost fainted with relief. They searched the area, entered the house and made the round, but found nothing. No evidence of burglary, no traces of anyone. The man, the stranger, was simply no longer there. Even so, the feeling of being observed did not disappear. The worst of all was when reviewing the history of the doorbell once again, I saw that night, the man had stopped in front of the door as always, but this time, he had a smile on his face. A smile I hadn't seen before. I decided to spend the weekend in an isolated cabin in the countryside, just me and the silence, to try to disconnect myself from the rush of the city. The rain outside only increased, hitting the windows hard, creating that almost cozy atmosphere. I thought it would be the perfect refuge to rest, think about life, and stay away from distractions. But little did I know that tranquility would turn into something I couldn't explain so soon. At first, everything seemed normal, except for the sound of the rain, which intensified. However, around midnight, I started to hear strange noises like light steps on the balcony, as if someone was walking outside. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind, but more and more it seemed that people were approaching the door. Fear began to consume me slowly. With each pop of the hut's wood, the sound of the footsteps became more audible, closer. I was paralyzed in bed, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks, but when I heard something dragging on the balcony, I couldn't stay there anymore. I decided to take a look through the window, but I saw nothing but the shadows of the trees swaying with the wind. When I woke up in the morning, I was relieved, thinking that maybe it was all something in my head. But when I looked at my backpack, I realized that it was open and some objects were missing, as if someone had been moving there during the night. The worst thing is that, no matter how I looked, there were no signs of burglary. The door was closed, the windows too. I tried to understand what was happening, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I was alone in that cabin, but it seemed like I wasn't anymore. Something or someone had been there, and now it seemed that nothing else was safe. I decided not to let fear take over me, so I tried to follow the day normally. But even so, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of being watched. Everything seemed strange, and any noise that came from the house made me quickly look at the windows, as if I was waiting for someone to look back. During breakfast, I realized that the steps on the balcony had continued during the night, but I had not been able to hear exactly what was happening. But the scariest thing was when I went back to the balcony area and saw a small wet footprint mark on the floor near the door. This didn't make sense, because the rain was heavy and no one could have walked there without leaving a more evident trail. I tried to convince myself that it could be something of my own subconscious, but that made me tense enough to start thinking about leaving early. As the afternoon passed, the discomfort only increased. I started checking every corner of the cabin again, hoping to find some logical explanation for the noises and the moving objects. However, nothing made sense. Even the TV, which was turned off since I arrived, was now on the black screen, as if someone had pressed the power button. It was as if the cabin was being used, but I hadn't seen anyone there. I decided I needed to leave, but something in me made me hesitate. The idea of simply leaving everything and leaving didn't seem right to me, but the feeling of fear only increased. When I went to check my backpack again, I realized that other objects had disappeared. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wasn't alone there anymore. I didn't know who or what was watching me, but I didn't want to stay to find out. The rain was still heavy outside, making the dirt road even more difficult to face at night. Even so, I decided that I wasn't going to spend another night there. I packed my things as quickly as possible, throwing everything inside the backpack without worrying about organizing. Every sound coming from outside seemed amplified, as if someone was lurking, waiting for me to open the door. Before leaving, I took one last look through the window and saw something that froze me for a few seconds. The chairs on the balcony, which were aligned when I arrived, were now with their backs to the house, as if someone had been sitting there watching the forest. That was enough for me to leave in a hurry, throwing the backpack in the car seat and starting the engine as soon as possible. When I started to go down the dirt road, I felt a momentary relief that I was leaving that hut behind. But then, in the rearview mirror, something caught my attention. In the middle of the road, a few meters from the exit, there was something on the ground, right in the middle of the road. I stood still for a moment, trying to understand what it was. When the headlights lit up better, I saw that it was my flashlight, the same one I always carried in my backpack. The problem is that I hadn't taken anything from there since I closed it. My blood frosted. I didn't even want to think about how that ended up there. I just accelerated and followed without looking back. To this day, I don't know if someone was there with me, or if he's still waiting for someone else to rent that cabin. I work in an office in the city center, and sometimes a week, I need to stay up late to finalize reports. That night, It was already past 11 when I finally turned off the computer and took my things to leave. The street in front of the building was almost deserted, with only a few cars passing by from time to time. My building was about 10 minutes away, and the drive was smooth. The problem started when I arrived at the underground garage. After parking, I got out of the car and walked towards the elevator. The environment was quiet. You could only hear the sound of my footsteps echoing in the concrete. That's when I noticed another sound, steps that seemed to adjust to my rhythm. I stopped for a second, holding the key harder in my hand, and looked around. I didn't see anyone. I took a deep breath and kept walking, trying not to look nervous. But the feeling persisted, as if someone was there, only out of my field of vision. When I got to the elevator, I pressed the button and looked back discreetly. The garage was still empty. My heart was still racing, but I tried to convince myself that it was something in my head. As soon as the doors opened, I entered quickly and tightened my floor. The feeling of relief didn't last long. As the doors slid to close, I had the clear impression of seeing a shadow moving at the end of the garage corridor. My breathing stops for a moment, but the elevator was already going up, taking me to the safety of my apartment. I locked the door as soon as I entered, but the restlessness didn't pass. I changed my clothes, tried to watch something on TV, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's when I had the idea of accessing the building's security cameras through the mobile app. I rolled the recordings until the time I had arrived, and at the exact moment I was walking to the elevator, I saw a man standing in the shadows, a few meters from me. He was motionless, watching me. The strangest? As soon as the elevator doors closed, he simply turned around and left the garage, without ever entering the building. My stomach turned at the time. I watched the video again, trying to find some logical explanation, but there was none. The man was there, in the darkness of the garage, watching me. He didn't try to run after me, he didn't make any sudden movements. He just stood still, almost as if he knew I would notice him, as if he wanted me to know he was there. After I got into the elevator, he just turned around and disappeared from the cameras. I closed the app and went to the window, looking at the street downstairs. The movement was minimal at that time of night. I tried to see someone suspicious, but there was no one. Even so, I felt it. I felt like he was still around, as if he knew exactly where I was. I locked all the doors and windows, checked every corner of the apartment, and tried to convince myself that it was safe. But sleep that night? That was impossible. I lay down on the bed, but my whole body was tense. The image of that man standing in the dark of the garage didn't leave my head. I tried to ignore the feeling, tell myself that maybe he was just a resident who gave up entering the building, but it didn't make sense. Who stands still in the dark, watching someone like that? Every little noise in the apartment made me hold my breath. The pop of the wood, the distant noise of a car passing on the street, the very sound of my breathing. And then something different came. A subtle noise, but that made me freeze. The sound of muffled steps in the corridor outside. Slow, dragged steps, as if someone was standing there waiting. I held my breath and stood still. The steps stopped right in front of my door. My heart was beating so hard that I was sure anyone outside could hear it. I took my cell phone with trembling hands and opened the application of the building's security cameras. My vision was blurred by fear, but when the image loaded, my stomach turned. The man from the garage was standing in the hallway of my floor, facing my door. He didn't move, he didn't try to hit, he was just there, motionless, as if he knew I was looking. I pressed the button to record the screen and entered the concierge number. When the security guard answered, I tried to speak, but my voice failed. I could only look at that gloomy figure, waiting for what he would do next. I forced my voice out and explained to the security guard what was happening. He was silent for a moment, then said he would send someone to check. I kept my eyes on the screen, waiting for any movement. But suddenly, the camera gave a quick interference, and when the image returned, the corridor was empty. The man had disappeared. I got up slowly and looked through the peephole, without the courage to open the door. Nothing. Only the silent corridor, as if no one had been there. Minutes later, I heard the elevator coming, and the steps of the security guard in the hallway. I opened the door a little, and he looked at me confused. "There's no one here," he said, looking around. I showed the recording on my cell phone. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the device. He frowned and said he would check the building's cameras. I just wanted it to make sense, but something told me that this story wouldn't end there. The security guard asked me to lock the door and stay inside the apartment while he checked the images. I agreed, but my mind was accelerated. I walked around the apartment, trying to think of another explanation. Maybe it was someone who lived in the building and only looked suspicious from the camera angle. But then why did he disappear so quickly? And why did I feel like I wasn't alone yet? When the security guard called me minutes later, his voice was strangely calm. He said he reviewed the recordings and, apart from that moment in the hallway, there was no record of anyone entering or leaving the building at that time. No stranger, nothing. The camera at the main entrance showed no one. "Are you sure you've seen someone?" he asked. I was speechless. I was sure. But if the cameras didn't show anything, then who the hell was there following me? I hung up the phone and stood there, standing in the middle of the room, trying to reason. I knew I wasn't crazy. I heard the steps, saw the shadow move, felt the presence of someone there with me. But if the cameras didn't show anything, then what did that mean? My instinct screamed that something was wrong, that somehow that man was still around. I closed all the curtains and checked the door lock at least 3 times, but none of this made me feel safe. The night was long. Each snat in the building made me hold my breath. Each shadow seemed to move by itself. I looked at the clock countless times, waiting for the sun to rise. When the first rays of light crossed the curtain slats, I felt a little relief. But it was only when I left for work that morning that I noticed a detail that frosted me to the bone. The door of the neighboring apartment, which had been empty for months, was slightly ajar. My heart raced. The door of that apartment has always been closed, locked, without any sign of movement. But now there she was, just leaning, as if someone had left in a hurry or worse, was still inside. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my stomach. The corridor was too quiet, and through the dark gap of the door, all I could see was a frightening emptiness. I knew I should just leave, but my feet seemed stuck to the floor. Was it just the wind? Would anyone have entered there? I looked around, but there was no one. The elevator was a few meters away, but I felt vulnerable. I took a deep breath and started walking, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. When entering the elevator, I pressed the ground floor button repeatedly, without looking back. But before the doors closed completely, I felt an absolute chill when I saw, by the reflection on the steel panel, the apartment door opening a little more. The elevator doors closed, and I stood there motionless, feeling my chest rise and fall quickly. I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind, that I was tired and paranoid. But that feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me. When I got to the ground floor, I hesitated before leaving. If that man was really watching me, was he still around? I looked at the door, but the security guard wasn't there. The building was silent, as if the whole world was suspended in a state of restlessness. I ran to the reception, knocking on the counter to call someone, anyone. That's when I noticed the security camera's screen flashing. On the monitor that showed the entrance to the building, a dark figure was standing outside, exactly in the same place where he was hours ago. He hadn't left. My stomach sank. He was still there. Stop. Real estate. As if you were waiting for something. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run to my apartment, lock all the doors and hide, but something inside me kept me there, frozen, staring at that figure on the screen. Suddenly, as if he knew I was watching him, he took a step back, then another, until he disappeared into the darkness of the street. He didn't run, he didn't hesitate. It just disappeared. I stayed there for a while longer, trying to catch my breath, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Even now, months later, every time I'm alone at night, I can't help but look over my shoulder, hoping to see that silhouette in the darkness.